What you looking at, you toilet? Don't watch this video, because the first 8 minutes is a steaming turd. Just fast forward to the end to see how to solder on a stove. Time for testing ideas. Well, thin dishes don't work. The heat concaves the bottom and doesn't transfer the heat properly. The paste turned to solder here, but over here was a cold spot where it just stayed paste, and that was even at 180 degrees Celsius. I got sick of how long it was taking, so I threw it straight on the hot plate, and it soldered in seconds. Basically, flatness is critical for heat transfer. Let's look at the test and the aftermath. I made some makeshift DIY stencils by using the PCB as the size guide. I did light scores over the PCB to mark them out, then cut them out proper on the hard backing. If you've got a spare PCB to sacrifice, I suppose you can just cut it out on the PCB. I printed out a 3D screw plunger so I'd have more control. Slapped on some Exored X. Is X pronounced as S? Spread it out. And we get balls. Maybe it's too much paste, or maybe it's the lack of a part not sucking up the excess. I then worked out the volume of this block is equivalent to a 1.6mm bead, so why not just try that and save time on stencils? Well, that didn't work with the Exored X. Then I thought of making one big slot for small passives and hoping the surface tension will pull it to the pads. This is where I notice the Exored X is a bit dry. The problem with this method is you can't see where the pads are, so you might have to put a black dot next to them before you put the paste down. I'll put some down in random locations and see if it picks them up. Well, it did separate the individual pads, and I don't see any shorts under any of the parts, but you'll probably have to check every one just to be sure. See how the Exored X is a bit dry and hard to apply? We'll try a bead on this wider pitch. You can see how it's not tacky and doesn't want to stick. If the camera wasn't in the way, I could have had the syringe more vertical to push it into the PCB. Q407 and 406 just balled up. We'll try some individual pads by hand and then place some parts. They seem okay and there's no solder bridges underneath. Let's try my local chem tools. It's string, so it must be more sticky. Seems okay as well. Let's try a chem tool bead. This one beaded as well, so maybe you have to force it into the PCB vertically. Chem tool bead on another pitch. I had tinned this footprint in another experiment, and that might have caused these pads to come out perfect. Maybe beating it sideways makes it sit over the pads, because it was balls again. I started thinking my thinned out 3-year-old mechanic might be more tacky. This is definitely non-controlled application. It kind of works, but it does need more controlled application. The old mechanic thinned out certainly sticks, but you don't have any control of application this way. Maybe I should syringe it. It ended up a big shorted blob. Take 2. I thought I'd try the Exored X again, but its lack of adhesion just makes it so difficult. I thought I'd apply it vertically and push it into the PCB, but it just sticks to the tip and pulls away. In the end I gave up. I accidentally dropped some steel on the Exored X when it was molten, but it looked like this. This is chem tools applied by hand, and I think the excessive blobs is there's either too much paste or the lack of a part on top didn't suck up the excess solder. Chem tools with DIY stencil. Chem tools applied by hand. This is the stencil. And this is by hand. Notice how shiny this stuff is. You can see the hand waving. Either way, there's probably too much paste or the lack of a part caused the blobs. Hand blobs, just guessing the volume. This stuff has a lot of adhesion and just sticks to the PCB like shit to a blanket. They look pretty good to me. We'll try the chem tools on this fine pitch. One side stencil, the other side by hand, and the amount just guessed. Yeah, about the same as usual. Might have to leave these parts off and hand solder them afterwards. Random chem tool dots with no parts. 3 Chemtool dots for the diodes. Random XERDX dots, 3 blobs for the diode, the usual adhesion problem. I put the thinned out old mechanics in a syringe and put a few blobs around. The Chemtool blobs fared a bit better. There's the diode, whereas the XRED, they were bigger because the paste is less runny and you can't put down a smaller amount. The mechanics one's pretty much a mess. Chemtools on fine pitch here and here. Not great. Maybe solve those parts on afterward if you're interested in what happened on the stove. The old thinned out mechanics is starting to run. The Chemtools went running at a higher temperature, but the XREDX didn't get affected. The recess in the element made a cold spot here. Third time's a charm. I have a stencil on the way for the Frankenzo, but now I think I have a plan for the second Frankenstein test where we'll save $30 by not having a stencil. Solder paste. Tackier paste is easier to apply and the Chemtool sticks to anything, so I'll be using that one. Application. Now that I know the blob size, smaller is better, I'm going to do it by hand, blobbing each individual pad. I'm going to switch to a smaller nozzle for better control. Fine pitch pads. It looks like I'm putting too much paste down, so I'm going to make a smaller window in the DIY stencil. The pads are roughly 1.5mm wide, so just cut a 1mm slit. Heating. I'm going to use a stovetop, but I'm going to press the PCB down on a solid bit of flat steel, and hopefully that will eliminate cold spots. Well, open top stoves didn't work out that good. I ended up with cold spots again. I guess that's why they put lids on hot plates, to even out the temp. This middle one looks suspicious because it happened in the same place again, and that's where I found out it was the PCB bowing up in the centre from the heat. I gave up on the cold spots at 175 degrees C. The rest of the blobs look okay. The parts look okay, but I do notice there is less solder on them now, which is due to the smaller syringe nozzle. There's no way I've got too much paste on it this time, so those blobs must be due to the part not being on there and its pins to suck up the solder. Looks like I'm a glutton for punishment. Wick all the solder off the PCB again. I used the green 0.9mm nozzle for the first 2 tests, but it seemed a bit blobby. The blue 0.54mm nozzle for the third test, but it seemed a bit slower, so I went for the pink 0.72 for this test. Freehand blobbity blob blob blob. And clamp that mother down so it can't bow up. At about 146 degrees C it did this. It all went to solder except this last section, so I had to push it down manually, and it pretty much went straight away. Done at about 150 degrees C. I can devise a clamping system to do it this way, but I was thinking it's not very easy for beginners to do, so I was just about to give up. Take 5. Ruddy hell, it ended up being a piece of piss. Here I was thinking the heat had to come through the plate, but I should have done like the other guys and just put a lid on it and used the trapped air like it is in an oven. The damn PC doesn't even need to touch the plate, and the thermocouple could just flap in the air because you're using it to measure the hot air. All you need is an old fry pan and a lid on it. If you got a pot with a glass lid, you could probably even see what's going on. 180 degrees C. And I can see it just starting down here. 10 seconds more and it's 190. Pop the lid and it's all done. Every single corner has been changed to solder with no effort at all. And that's how you make a mini oven with practically nothing. Just a stove, some old frying pans and a $6 thermocouple from eBay. A total piece of piss. It's alright, my son. You can fuck off now.